Serious Redditors who were almost murdered. What's your story? I was coming home from a bachelor's party at 2 AM, and on the way home, I realized we all had forgotten the steak dinner portion of the evening that we had all planned. I didn't want to wake up my wife and baby drunkenly rummaging around the kitchen, so I had the taxi drop me off at the Dunkin' Donuts a half mile from my house. This was pre-Uber times. I got myself a couple egg and cheese bagels and started walking home. Now I made sure to take the quieter neighborhood street rather than the busier street in order to make sure to avoid potential drunk drivers. However, about a block into the neighborhood, I see a pair of dudes coming my way down the sidewalk. I consider crossing the street, but realize how insulting that would be to the two men clearly just walking home from a fun evening just like me. When they are a few feet away, I give them a "how you doing?" not, and they returned it with their own. I was so proud of my decision to treat them like fellow bros and not be so suspicious. Then, as they walk past me, one of them pulls his hand up in the air, holding a tire iron, and strikes me in the back of the head hard. I fall into the street from the impact but remain conscious. One holds my arms down, while the other climbs on my legs and starts rifling through my pockets. I tell them to take what they want, and they tell me to shut up, or they will kill me. Then they ask me where my wallet is, and when I tell them which pocket it is in, they tell me to shut up, or they will kill me. They took my wallet, phone and watch, and then kicked a few more times in the head, but then took off. I was bleeding and super concussed, and without a phone at 2:30 AM, and there was no way I could make it home on my own. I saw a house nearby where the flickering light of a TV could be seen in an upstairs bedroom. I crawled over to the house and pulled myself up onto the porch and leaned against the door and knocked and hollered for help. The homie owner was rightfully scared and didn't want to open the door at that hour for a stranger who wouldn't even stand up to be seen through his front door's viewfinder. I was feeling very faint at this point and was covered in blood from the head wound, but convinced him to call 911 and get an ambulance. I also asked if he could call my wife. At that point he seemed to feel more confident that I was not trying to trick him, and he offered me a cordless phone through a chained door. He said he wanted to help, but I needed to stay out on the porch because he had just redone his floors and I was bleeding way too much. When the EMTs arrived, they decided they should take me to the better hospital instead of the one a few blocks away, but the route to the other hospital required several blocks of driving on cobblestones, an experience I would not recommend to any concussed individual strapped to a gurney in the back of an ambulance. I needed 24 staples in my head and the doctors all told me I was lucky to have survived such a massive blow to the head with a blunt object. But the sad part, I never actually got my egg and cheese bagels. The last time I saw my ex, I broke up with him while we sat in his car at a park. After choking me until I passed out, he got onto the freeway and drove 100+ miles per hour while slamming my head into the window and dashboard. I was able to get out of the car at one point when he got off the freeway and ran into the street screaming, trying to wave down a car but no one stopped. He was forcing me into his trunk when a man pulled over and started filming him, and I ran onto a bus. I won't ever forget how his eyes looked and that he was absolutely silent the whole 2 hours. I moved across the country after his mom called me panicking to warn me he was looking for me. I've told this before, but I witnessed a murder directly in front of me while I was sitting in my Jeep with the top down. Two guys were arguing on the sidewalk. I was just sitting there. They knew I was there and didn't care. One guy pulled out a homemade shank from his pant leg and straight armed it into the other guy's eye. I will never forget the crunching sound when that blade went into his face. The murderer looked at me once and bolted. I ran up to help, but the guy was flipped. Blood spouting out of his eye and gushes, and he was moaning horribly. He died as the ambulance arrived. I was the only witness and nearly testified in court, but the guy pleaded guilty and got 25 years. Still have nightmares about that 25 years later. I got shot twice in the back while working in Africa. I'll condense the story as much as possible. There's a whole prelude to it that explains the why, but that's actually really hard for me to talk about. I flew helicopters in Africa for almost 6 years. Mainly for small, frontline NGOs serving rural populations in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, etc. Most of the work centered around OB/gyn care/HIV/AIDS treatment/prevention/infectious disease treatment/vaccination. East Africa isn't exactly green acres, and there are a lot of interesting characters/groups roaming the countryside. Militants, poachers, jihadists, oh my. They don't generally like being hassled by Westerners, especially when you fly with heavily armed security. We were in a small Kenyan village called Kiunga on the Kenya/Somali border when we were assaulted by a group of militants, likely Al-Shabaab. The Boni National Reserve was a common idiot for them, and there were active warnings in place to prevent tourists from venturing there to see animals. I got word that we were ready to head out, so myself and my number 2 at the time started the pre-flight check. While we were in the process of starting the engines, a group of really nice young men rolled up in a Toyota Hilux and, in the glorious words of Frank Reynolds, started blasting. 2 rounds pierced the panel directly behind the cockpit of the Bell 412 we were flying that day and fragmented. 2 of the larger fragments blew through the back of the seat I was in, and the rest is history. Our security detail, to their immense credit, did exactly what they were paid exceptionally well to do, and those fine young men in that Hilux had a very bad day. The lead doc and one of the nurses yanked me out of the seat and stabilized me as best they could in the back. That meant a spritz of some serious pain meds, atomized fentanyl and ketamine right up the nose for the win, a clotting agent, Celux, and some serious pressure in the form of a German doctor named Fritz kneeling on my back. The wounds themselves weren't life-threatening, but they hurt like a mother. I've got 2 nice scars with some real clean suture work/s. The flight back to Mombasa was not fun. I was a kid on a trip with my family, and the hired driver had a mental breakdown and tried driving us off a bridge. I posted this story before on another thread once, but here goes. When I was in high school, a random new kid started stalking me. Like following me home from school, I'd see him outside my house. He'd stand by my locker at school. He was weird. Told my counselor, but they didn't really believe me. Told a teacher I was close with, and he talked to the principal. They said they'd watch out. After about a week, my boyfriend was pissed the school wasn't helping me. He confronted this kid and they almost physically fought. Finally, he got kicked out of school, and about a month later, less than 3 miles from my house, he strangled a girl my age, who also went to my school, and dumped her body in a field. Not sure if this counts, but I was 11 and meeting my friend on a bridge in town, and when I got there, there were these 2 19/20Y/O guys who were there to mug me. Pretty sure my friend had set me up as some kind of initiation or something. Anyway, things got incredibly weird when I didn't have anything that they wanted, and one of them just kind of flipped out and got very aggressive. I was put in a headlock and pulled to the side of the bridge and told that if I cried or made any indication that I was scared, that he would throw me off. Some beer man, such nonsense. I was terrified, so of course I teared up, and as he was pushing me into the barrier, my friend, who had been silent the whole time, screamed like a proper scream and shouted at me to run. The scream had distracted them for a second, so I pulled out of this guy's grip and ran. Me and my friend split directions and they gave chase to me instead of him, but luckily for me there was a police car at the bottom of the stairs next to the bridge with 2 cops having their lunch break. I bundled straight into the back of the police car, and when I looked up, the 2 guys were now running in the other direction. I think the intention was to really scare the crap out of me, rather than anything more serious, but to me, 11 at the time, it felt very real. Safe to say I never spoke to that friend again. Open bracket. Edit. Typo. When I was young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, my family lived in a small town of about 1,200 people. It was mostly a farming town. My dad was the manager of the only bank in town. A farmer missed some payments on a loan, so the bank foreclosed and took his farm. This farmer apparently blamed my father personally, so he went to the bank with a rifle and threatened my father. My father talked to him, cops were called, and the farmer was arrested and arraigned. Bail was posted for the farmer, so he was released from jail. A few days later, my family was eating dinner, and we heard a truck pull up and park in front of our house. It was a really quiet street in a small town, so my father went to the front window to see who pulled up. It was the farmer, and this time he had a shotgun. He walked right up to the front door and knocked, and my family busted, but out of the back door, and ran to a neighbor's house. Our front door was unlocked, so he could have opened it and blasted us all, but I guess he didn't think to check it. Cops were again called, and the farmer was arrested. My family spent the next week or so in a hotel a few towns away, until it was assured that the farmer would be in jail without the possibility of bail. I was a freshman in college, and, in my first semester, pledged to fraternity. One night, I was assigned to work the door at a party, which was not uncommon. Around 1:32 am, a group of guys that worked at the dining hall, I remembered the one, because he made an amazing cheese steak, showed up and each paid $5 per cup. A few minutes after they paid, the last keg kicked and none of them got any beer. As soon as they told me that the kegs just kicked, I started counting out cash to pay them back for the cups that they bought. Before I could get them their money back, one of my drunk pledge brothers decided to physically force them out the door while yelling / crap talking them. As soon as I could calm my buddy down, I went outside to give them their cash back, only to be met with a big surprise. When I made it down the back steps, Cheetah Steak guy aggressively steps forward and says y'all made a big flipping mistake. I'm strapped as a mother flipper, pulls a handgun out of his waistband and points it directly between my eyes. In that moment, it was remarkable that 18-year-old me didn't crap his pants immediately. A few of the older guys in the house stepped outside and were able to talk the guy down without incident, but it felt like I had that gun pointed between my eyes for an eternity. Long story short, I was incredibly lucky that I didn't get shot that night. Needless to say, I went without cheese steaks for a few semesters after that night. My brother struggled with mental health issues his entire life. When I was really young, he pushed me into the deep end of the pool knowing I couldn't swim and walked away. They found me floating face down in the pool shortly after and had to resuscitate me. Years later, he took his own life. Mental health issues are not to be ignored. This is my aunt's story, but it's too good to not share. My aunt was almost killed by the famous serial killer Michael Swango, the killer doctor. She worked as a unit secretary at the ward he worked in regularly, and they knew each other well. Part of his routine was poisoning people he worked with, and he admitted, after he was caught, he was planning on killing her, but his coworkers got suspicious of him, and he left town before he had the chance. I was a clerk at an appliance repair shop. Some guy had brought his riding lawnmower in to be worked on, but decided it cost too much to have repaired. So my boss asked me to load it up in our lift truck and drive it to his address. I was 17 and had my relatively newly minted license on me, so it felt like a big responsibility, and I was happy to do it. I loaded it up just fine and drove to his address. When I started to unload it, I noticed that the battery was unattached. One of the technicians must have removed it to work on it or something. Unfortunately, I had no tools to put it back in. I checked the work order, and it said customer declined repair, needs replacement engine. So I thought, woo, he won't care, because the engine is dead anyway. I rang the doorbell, and this fat drunk guy with no shirt opens the door suddenly. I had lowered the riding mower off the lift truck and had pushed it into his yard. He yells, "What the hell are you leaving that pile of junk in my yard for?" I said, "Is this not your riding lawnmower?" He says, "Hell yes, it's mine, but it's in pieces and I don't want the damn thing. What the F is wrong with you people?" So I apologize and ask him if he wanted me to load it back up. I didn't know what else to say. For some unknown reason, this pissed him off even more, and he disappeared back in his house. I go back to the truck to radio my boss, this was back in the days before cell phones, to see what she wanted me to do. In the meantime that drunk bastard stomps out onto his porch with a shotgun, leveled it at the truck, and pulled the trigger. The windshield shattered, and I literally couldn't hear anything but ringing from the noise. I jumped in the truck, started it up, put it in reverse, and floored it out of his driveway, almost going into the ditch on the other side of the road. He fires again, this time hitting the passenger side of the truck near the door, blowing shrapnel into the cab of the truck, which hit my leg and cut me a bit. I flew back to work faster than I had ever driven before, called my mom and dad, and told my boss I was never coming back to work there again. The cops came and took my statement, arrested the dumbass, and I had to testify against him a few months later, despite desperately never wanting to see him again. He only spent about 6 months in prison for it. Luckily by the time things were settled I had moved away to college, and didn't have to worry about him anymore. Edit. I'm very surprised by how much my story took off. Someone suggested an app TLDR. TLDR drunk guy tried to kill me cause I dumped his lawnmower in his property. I was working at a gas station. It was at night and slow, so I was sitting in the office watching TV. All of a sudden, one guy comes in behind me, another guy comes in front of me. Guy in front says don't get up. I give him the wad of cash from my breast pocket, and then the money from my front pocket. They rush out back into the darkness. I stay put, just like the guy said. Then I call the owner. A car pulls up to get gas. I tell them they need to pay by credit card or exact change, because I just got robbed. Then I reach up to touch my neck. It was bloody. The guy in back was holding a knife to my throat. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but my closest bruiser working at a university, guy called the office saying he used to attend, wanted to re-enroll, but had such a strange set of circumstances that he was elevated to me. After a few minimums, I could tell something was off. Turns out he was mentally unsound and calling from a mental care hospital. He sounded like he just wanted to chat and seemed lonely, so his S were always sent to me. He ended up calling once a week or so and mostly just prattled on about nothing, but sometimes would drop something extra weirdo. He told me he was secretly Jesus Christ. He'd actually helped found the university, that he owned the city's baseball team, that he knew a secret word at a store in the mall that would get me free soap for life. Anyway, I talked to him each time he called and thought I was helping a lonely old man. After about 6 months of it, I got a call from campus safety telling me my dad was on campus to visit, but couldn't find my office. My dad lives states away, so I obviously knew something was up. I could hear talking in the background and recognized his voice. I let the officer know that this was not my dad and that he definitely should not be allowed on campus. They were obviously suspicious, hence the call to me. The officer on duty ended up getting him to give more info. Turns out he'd been released from a mental facility that day for threatening a nurse with a scalpel and then smearing his own crap all over her and his room. I'm guessing he wasn't there to kill me, but we were all pretty freaked out. He still calls every once in a while, and we just forward him to the campus officer who knows him. Last I heard, he called from jail. When I was 19 I dated a girl whose dad was a pie show. Was probably just over 5 feet tall but all muscle. Did a bunch of time in prison for drugs and violent crimes. Once had a guy cut him off in traffic, followed the guy and finally boxed him in, tore open his car door, and held a knife to the guy's crotch threatening to cut his weenie off until the guy wet himself. This level of crazy, didn't find most of this out until after the fact. Me and her lived together in an apartment. I worked afternoons, she worked days. There was a couple hours in the afternoon when no one was there. Had a day off one day and was running some errands. Came home in that time frame when no one was normally home, and her father came walking out of our bedroom. I asked him what he was doing there, and he told me, because he liked me, he would be honest. He said he was there to rob us. He was on drugs and was in the middle of a crime spree. Held up a bunch of people in the complex who were entering or leaving the building, then came through our bedroom window. He said he looked around and didn't find anything, so he was on his way out. He said he wouldn't hurt me, but if I ever told anyone this happened, including his daughter, I would disappear and no one would ever find me, and he walked out. The whole time he was talking to me, all I could think of was, don't give him a reason to attack me. That, and I had a coffee cup in the living room with almost $1,000 in it. Thankfully he didn't find that. I thankfully never saw him again. My relationship was on the rocks and this gave me the needed push to get out of there. I never told anyone what happened until after he died. Edit. Just thought of another situation where he could have killed me, and also demonstrates how crazy he was. He went away on a hunting trip, and while he was gone I came over one day after she got home from school. She was a senior in high school at the time. Her mom was at work and we just sat around on the couch for a couple hours. No exaggeration. 3 hours after we got home, he comes walking out of the front coat closet. He tells us he wanted to see what we would do though he was out of town. So he got home early and waited in the closet for a few hours peeping on us to see what we would do. Once we felt nothing was going to happen, he came out. I can't imagine what he would have done if we starting fooling around. Like and subscribe for more videos.